Hey, it's Paige Browning in for Patricia Murphy. It's Monday. This is Seattle Now. Washington state has some major new goals and policies for the climate crisis. David Roberts with the Volts Clean Energy newsletter is here to explain. But first, let's get you caught up. Is the coronavirus outbreak plateauing here in Washington? Public health officials say it's too soon to tell. Estimates from mid-April show an infected person is spreading the virus to 1.4 other people on average. Meanwhile, variants of the original virus continue their grip in this state. 80% of new cases are due to the B.1.1.7 variant. Seattle City Council member Kshama Sawant's opponents are feeling more confident in their recall effort now that she has admitted to an ethics violation. Sawant agreed in a settlement with the city that she used city resources to promote a so-called head tax. Sawant's supporters stand by her, saying the recall is an attempt to remove the city's most progressive council member. And turns out Bill and Melinda Gates' split up has been years in the making. The Wall Street Journal reported over the weekend that Melinda Gates started speaking with divorce lawyers back in 2019. One possible factor, according to the Journal, was Bill's philanthropy-related discussions with Jeffrey Epstein before Epstein was charged with child sex trafficking and died. The Gateses are beginning to split up their assets and have said they plan to give away most of their wealth. This was no ordinary year for the Washington state legislature. They passed some energy and climate bills that advocates had been left dreaming of for years. Here with me to talk about it, and frankly help me understand it a little more, is journalist David Roberts. He writes the newsletter Volts about clean energy and politics. Hey, David.
Hey, glad to be here.
So no pressure. You have to help me understand this some more.
There's a lot going on.
So the state passed a number of climate and energy bills this year, and you are now calling Washington the most ambitious state in the nation on climate policy. Really? Why?
Well, it's not any single bill that puts us over the top. I think it is the combination of all the bills. So, if you look at the Washington economy, it's electricity, buildings, and transportation that are the big three sources of emissions. And we now have individual bills going after each one of those sectors. And then also this sort of comprehensive bill that has a cap on carbon, a declining cap on carbon in the background to sort of mop up the remainder. So we're both doing this sort of sector-specific industrial policy that works really well, and then in the background, carbon pricing policy. So it's very comprehensive. We're coming at it from both sides.
Where does this put us compared to other states? Are other states following a program like this?
Well, in terms of the cap and trade aspect, that's mostly a West Coast thing. That's mostly a California thing. California is the only other state in the nation that has even arguably similar comprehensiveness in their policy. We're going after our entire economy. There are lots of states that have clean electricity programs these days, zero electricity, net zero carbon. You see that from lots of companies and lots of states. We're going after emissions across the economy. So really only California even arguably has similarly broad ambitions. And we had the benefit of going second. We went after California, so we also learned from California's experience and improved the program.
Watch what you do and improve it, right?
Exactly.
So why is this such a win for the climate?
Well, climate-wise, Washington state, its emissions in the grand scheme of things are not that much. We have to remember what a giant problem climate change is. Even the entire U.S.'s emissions aren't that big a deal in the grand scheme of things of climate change, right? It's a global thing. Everybody's going to have to do the work. But I think the benefit is going to be Washington is going to show other states that you can do this, and it will spur economic activity. It will create jobs. It will attract good workers, smart workers who are ambitious about this stuff. This is hot among the young smart set, right? Decarbonization is the thing to do now. So it's going to be great for Washington, and it will be primarily through our influence that we make a difference. We need to show other states that you can do this and prosper.
Is there any risk for being so far out front? What could go wrong for Washington state?
Well, I mean, lots of the things that can go wrong are a little bit wonky and have to do with policy details. Like
you could be wonky for a second.
Like hooking up with California, for instance, is a fraught thing. Like they have their big cap and trade system. We have ours. And the idea eventually is to link them up. And the idea eventually is to get as big and broad a system as possible because it's cheaper for everyone involved the broader the system is. Like a Washington system would be much cheaper if it were hooked up to the California system because you just have more options. But California's system has a lot of flaws. There's a lot of sort of cheap, bogus carbon offsets in their system. There's an oversupply of allowances in their system that's kind of holding the prices down. There's a lot of chronic problems in California's cap and trade system that they're not dealing with very well right now. And there's a big worry that if we hook up with them, we're going to get kind of dragged down a little bit as opposed to us dragging them up, because we're a pretty small junior partner in that thing. But there's always the danger with any complicated set of regulations and bills. A lot of these things depend on smart decisions by regulators in the future, right? Like a lot of the sort of implementation decisions are left to the Department of Ecology. So that is banking on there being smart, judicious, public-minded regulators there in the future, which is always a little bit of a gamble, when you're relying on the executive branch. We've seen at the federal level, if the wrong executive gets in, the executive branch can do a lot of damage to your ongoing plans. So in a sense, but there's no way around that. Like you're relying on future regulators and legislators no matter what you do, but that's always a risk.
Okay, let's talk about the future. Get out your crystal ball, if you will. If we reach these climate priorities and goals and the policies that the state has set, what will Washington state look like, say, in 2050?
Well, it's not like a new world. We're still going to live in buildings and drive around, it's still going to be life, but the buildings will be much better insulated. They'll be much more energy efficient. They will much more often be run by rooftop solar or be running on clean energy. The cars we drive around in will be much more EVs, and hopefully our housing crisis will be addressed. We'll be building more housing in cities, and fewer people will need cars. I was talking about how comprehensive our suite of policies is. That's the one real hole, is something about zoning and urban form and housing so that we can reduce the amount of miles people need to drive.
Make it so people don't actually want to have the car or get in it.
So they can walk around or get around with public transit. That's easily the most low carbon transportation you can get is transit. So that still needs to be addressed, and there's lots of people who are eager to go after that when the legislature gets back.
I know this isn't the end, David, to needing to take action on the climate crisis. So what would be the next big win for Washington?
Well, like I said, it would be about housing or density or zoning or that whole knot of issues. Like, for instance, there was a Growth Management Act in the legislature this session that died at the very last minute in the Senate. But it basically would have said to all communities in Washington, your growth plan, right? Every city and town has a sort of growth plan. Your growth plan has to take climate into account. You have to try to reduce emissions as you're doing this. And that's going to involve denser housing and better transit and better bus service and all that kind of thing. It would have forced every community in Washington to at least start thinking along those lines. And it died at the last minute in the Transportation Committee, so a lot of advocates are eager to go after that again. I think that would be sort of really the final piece of our carbon puzzle.
Okay, and that means we'll have reason to bring you back on. David Roberts writes the newsletter Volts about clean energy and politics. We've got a link in the show notes of today's episode so you can check it out. David, thanks for breaking this down for us.
Thanks for having me.
Seattle Now is produced by Caroline Chamberlain Gomez, Clare McGrane, and Jason Pagano. Matt Jorgensen does our music. I'm Paige Browning. See you tomorrow.